Alors, bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue à la session 7 sur les grandes disruptions, alors de la pandémie mondiale à la nouvelle ère numérique. Alors, on sait que le monde a été affecté par une pandémie sans précédent, vu l'étendue de cette pandémie, la rapidité avec laquelle elle s'est répandue dans l'humanité, et on sait que par le passé, bien entendu, il y a eu des épisodes similaires qui étaient localisés, qui ont changé le fonctionnement de civilisation. On peut commencer par exemple, la civilisation grecque, qui en 430 avant Jésus-Christ a eu une peste qui a fait en sorte que finalement toute l'architecture et la conception sociale de cette civilisation en a été affectée. On peut parler du Moyen-Âge, où finalement les différentes structures sociales ont évolué du féodalisme dur du début du Moyen-Âge vers justement une société un peu plus évoluée, socialement bien entendu. On peut parler de l'épidémie du choléra, fin du 19e siècle en Angleterre, qui a vu bien entendu l'introduction de nouvelles technologies en termes d'assainissement, des égouts, tout à l'égout, etc. Donc, on voit finalement, sur la base de ce qui s'est passé auparavant, que les changements qui sont opérés durant des pandémies ou des épidémies à l'époque, maintenant c'est a fortiori la pandémie, sont là pour durer, et il y a très peu d'outils qui vont changer et qui vont influencer l'humanité plus que les technologies d'information, l'ère numérique, qui finalement se voit attribuer un rôle consolidé et irréversible vraisemblablement. Et je suis content d'avoir parmi nous un panel très diversifié. Nous avons des experts en nouvelles technologies, des startups, bien entendu un focus sur le continent sur lequel nous nous trouvons, et sans parler de finalement ce que ces technologies ont fait dans le processus politique, aussi bien en termes d'inclusivité, de participation, mais également la gestion de la polarisation et les effets de cette polarisation. Bien entendu, on ne peut pas parler de tous ces effets sans parler de confiance en ce système numérique et des questions de sécurité et de défense. C'est pour la raison pour laquelle nous avons bien entendu aussi un expert militaire qui va nous parler un petit peu de tous ces enjeux. Alors, sans trop tarder, je souhaiterais présenter la première participante, la première panéliste qui intervient d'Afrique du Sud. Alors, vous avez le réglage des langages sur votre interface Zoom. I will switch to English to introduce Irène, Ochem. Welcome among us. It's a pleasure to have you with us. The biggest, I mean, obviously you have been involved with the African Women Innovation and Entrepreneurship. You initiated that forum on the continent. You're very active in making sure that women have their role to play, particularly on a continent, in making sure this revolution, this internet disruption is as inclusive as possible, particularly with respect of the gender dimension. What is likely to change? Obviously, technology is as accessible. It doesn't know any border on the gender. Please go ahead, Irène. What would you like to tell us?
First of all, I would like to say thank you to Amadeus Institute for inviting me and having me once again on their platform. It was a great pleasure last year to have been a part of the conversations in Tangier. Unfortunately, we are now using technology because of COVID. Yes, and that's what the conversation is all about. The impact of COVID-19 has been something extraordinary. And we have seen that with going into lockdown, everything went to technology, education, health, business, everything. We had to start doing everything with technology. Technology is a space where already you had challenges, women, constraints, women, you had much less women in tech than men. So we were already trying to bridge a gap. Now, this gap has been widened even more. We are, from our research, okay, as into women entrepreneurship and women's economic empowerment, which is where we operate on the African continent, we have seen that the impact of COVID-19 is quite gendered. Okay, women are disproportionately impacted, affected in every way, whether it's in the use of technology to continue running their businesses, because they were already constrained. Now they have to even manage with a much wider constraint. Whether it's in the use of technology to help children access learning, continue to access learning, because as women, our research, we have found out that we went into COVID, we had to go on with our businesses, we had to go on with our employments, those of them who didn't lose their jobs, we had to go on with managing family, managing children and their education. We had to go on with managing probably our partners, our husbands, who have also may have suffered loss of work or loss of income, loss of business, and who are going through a lot of anxiety. So some women also have had to go through violence, okay, in the household, because of all these are impacts, outcomes of COVID-19. So technology is here to stay. And after COVID-19, it is obviously going to be driving everything, driving business. It will continue to drive business. It will continue to drive health, the health system. It will continue to drive the food sector, food systems. It will continue to drive climate management, everything. If we take it to agriculture, for example, on the African continent, the agricultural activity, more than 70% of it is in the hands of women. And these women, many of them are operating in the informal sector as small farm holders. We need technology to be able to reach them. We need technology we need to leverage technology to help them, to support them, to assure more inclusivity, better inclusion. And as we know also, there are a lot of local innovations, technological innovations coming out of the continent, some of them by also women. I will come to that because we are currently running a program to support women in tech, okay, lead tech. So technology is all encompassing. It's about everything. And there is a gender gap, a serious gender gap there, which needs to be bridged. Women and youth, to ensure equal participation. Technology is important for trade, intra-African trade. We are now talking about the African Free Continental Free Trade Area, which from the 2nd of January starts off. How do we ensure inclusivity for women and youth? How do we drive that intra-African trade? It can only happen better with technology, e-commerce. That is technology. Okay, so all these things are coming to who we are. We are Africa Women Innovation and Entrepreneurship Forum. So what we do is driving female entrepreneurship on the continent, and bridging the gender gap in technology is one of the key things that we are doing. It's quite an interesting coincidence. We are running a program now called Lead Tech, okay, a Lead Tech Incubation Program. And this program, we are running it in partnership with the Mohammed VI Polytechnic University, which is an institution of the OCP group. So we are partners. Morocco is a great partner of our program. And we're currently running this program. A component of that program is supposed to have been a residency period at the university in Benghazi, but that has not happened. We are keeping our fingers crossed that things will get better, so that we will, in February, we will be there in Morocco to continue this, that component of element of the program. With this program, we have selected 17 young women tech entrepreneurs. They have agri-tech solutions, health tech solutions, fintech solutions, environmental management solutions, and selected from 8 African countries. And we are working with them to incubate their solutions and then help them to scale and facilitate access to finance and to market and to knowledge. So there is need to include women and youth in technology. It will help to fast track Africa's development, because that is what needs to happen. I wouldn't want to take too much time.
Yes, obviously very, very concerning, serious problems lay ahead in terms of youth and women empowerment. This will be obviously a core topic during the entire discussion that we will have. Jean-Paul Iwuoha, you are obviously an expert in startups, African startups. You have actually been involved in transforming small starters on the continent. Obviously, your opinions on the issue are well spread through the internet, namely also social networks. You have actually been nominated by LinkedIn as one of the best world voices on startups and entrepreneurship. When it comes to inclusivity and gender balance and the youth, to start the discussion, what it is you think is most concerning with do you see any trends, and do you feel that these challenges can be addressed using actually this disruption that we're witnessing today?
Okay, thank you very much. It's actually a pleasure and an honor to be on the panel again, this time virtually. And I'm happy we're starting the conversation with gender balance in the focus. Now, the common trend across Africa, like Madam Irene stated, women are heavily involved in small business, but then they are disproportionately not involved when it comes to financial access. They are significantly less likely to get loans, less likely to raise capital from formal sources, be they venture capital, private equity. So we see this significant participation from women, but then when it comes to the enablers, the capital, the training, the access, they are totally left out of that. Now, the second thing I noticed, which is important that we're having this conversation outside of a crisis, is that women have more or less borne the major brunt of this crisis for several different reasons, like Irene has mentioned. But it's important to note here that I spot an opportunity. And that opportunity is that COVID hit everybody by surprise. Many of the market incumbents were taken by surprise, and they really didn't understand how to more or less address the situation. What I see is that startups are very nimble because of their size, because of their nature. They are able to quickly adapt. Innovation is more likely to kick in faster when you're a startup than when you're a big organization and then you're sending all these emails and then having all these meetings. Before you can have a clear direction, it's very likely that a nimble startup has already gone into real action. So the opportunity with the COVID is that it has reset the business space. We're beginning to see interesting movements in some areas, which I'm going to go into detail with later on when we speak, from virtual education to financial services. And the other thing I want to mention is that it happens that women are much more active in certain sectors of the economy. So you look at fashion, you look at petty trade, agribusiness in the rural areas. But when you look at more or less the major performers, the business trends that are likely going to take center stage over the next decade, between 2021 and 2030, things like tech, whether it's solar, digital education, mostly everything digital, we find that female participation is not as strong there. So there's really this gap between conventional industries and where the future is going. And we need to get more women in tech. We need to get them to be able to build things. We need to get them to look beyond basic subsistence and look at actually building ventures. And those role models are very important, because the reason why women are disenfranchised when it comes to capital is that it's likely the guys who are making the decisions on where to allocate capital, most of them are men. So we need to get women up there so that they can also look out for people who are coming from the downstream. So it's important that we have solid role models for women in tech, in all these fast-growing industries, so that other young African women can see that it's possible and that they can do it too.
A nice lead to our next speaker, who will, Abdelkrim Samir. I will switch to French. Alors, des modèles féminins dans l'entrepreneuriat digital au niveau du continent. Vous êtes un entrepreneur, auteur, chroniqueur pour Le Point, journaliste tech en Afrique pour Le Monde. Et bien entendu, vous avez publié un ouvrage, Startup Lions, au cœur de l'African Tech. Alors, qu'est-ce que vous avez à nous dire par rapport à d'abord l'inclusion genre dans ces nouvelles technologies, les enjeux, les difficultés et quelles sont les pistes? On parle de modèles. Alors, qu'est-ce que vous avez?
Bien sûr. Alors, d'abord, je suis un ancien chroniqueur au Monde, c'est vrai. Actuellement, je suis plus chroniqueur au Point, mais c'était dans mon ancienne vie, j'étais tech reporter pour Le Monde en Afrique. Je ne le suis plus, mais pour Le Monde Afrique. Et ce que je peux dire, notamment par rapport aux interventions des uns et des autres, et ce que l'on voit très clairement, c'est qu'effectivement, la crise mondiale que nous sommes en train de vivre, clairement, elle nous pousse à revoir nos priorités pour renforcer la résilience de nos sociétés. Et comme toute crise, également, la pandémie, quelque part, elle est porteuse, bien sûr, de grandes menaces pour la planète, mais également d'opportunités. Et pour parler de ce que je connais, notamment par rapport à la tech, par rapport au monde entrepreneurial, par rapport aux startups, on voit sur le terrain, là, actuellement, je vous parle depuis le Caire, je suis en Égypte, où je rencontre beaucoup de startups et d'écosystèmes, et je reviens d'un incubateur qui s'appelle le Greek Campus. On voit que les entrepreneurs, malgré difficultés, ont démontré à travers cette crise qu'ils peuvent être les nouveaux maillons du nouvel impératif de résilience que nous devons faire preuve au niveau local, mais aussi global. Les startups, donc, qui sont fidèles à leur ADN, elles ont démontré une incroyable capacité d'adaptabilité sur le terrain à travers l'innovation de crise, je dirais, et en pivotant leur modèle économique pour faire face aux difficultés et en digitalisant, quand c'était possible, leur activité, voire en développant des modules spécifiques dédiés au Covid-19. Je vous donne quelques petits exemples. On a vu une vague, et notamment au Maroc, beaucoup de hackathons qui ont été développés notamment par différents acteurs de l'écosystème comme la Startup Factory de Mehdi Alaoui, qui a lui organisé le Maghreb Startup Covid-19. Mais on a vu par exemple des hackathons organisés par les communautés de start-upers à Lagos et à Abuja au Nigeria. Donc le Hack Covid marocain que je citais, qui est organisé par la Factory, le Covid-19 Knockdown Innovation Challenge qui s'est tenu à Kampala en Ouganda, le Hack at Home qui s'est tenu en Sierra Leone. On a vu l'engagement profond, puissant des communautés de makers à travers notamment les lieux qu'on appelle les Fab Labs, donc les makerspace. Par exemple, l'école d'ingénieurs de Sousse et ses étudiants qui ont réalisé avec des imprimantes 3D plus de 400 visières par jour avec notamment une start-up locale qui s'appelle 3D Wave pour aider les professionnels de santé à mieux s'équiper, il manquait d'équipement, ou bien fabriquer des masques, ou bien des respirateurs. Pour parler du Maroc, et j'ai oublié de commencer par là, je voulais remercier Brahim pour son invitation. L'Université internationale de Rabat et les universités de Mohamed V ont réalisé plus de 5000 masques FFP2 et visières de protection. Et on a vu aussi, pour recontextualiser avec le Maroc, que 34 usines de textiles marocaines ont totalement réorienté leur production dès le mois de mars pour fabriquer jusqu'à 7 millions de masques chirurgicaux par jour. Et on voit aussi au niveau de la tech, des solutions d'autodiagnostic, par exemple avec en Algérie la startup Brinco qui a développé un chatbot qui s'appelle FAS, qui en 3 mois d'utilisation a été téléchargé par plus de 40 000 utilisateurs, a permis de signaler 12 000 cas contacts et faciliter la prise en charge de 500 cas susceptibles d'être Covid-19 positifs. Donc on voit que les entrepreneurs, les startups sont vraiment à l'avant-poste de la riposte face, c'est le cas de le dire, face au Covid-19, et que le digital, bien entendu, permet de préparer quelque part le monde d'après. Alors, ce que je peux dire aussi, c'est que justement, on parlait de l'entrepreneuriat féminin. Beaucoup de ces solutions sont portées, bien entendu, par des startups dont les fondatrices, les cofondatrices sont des femmes. C'est principalement vrai, en particulier en Afrique du Nord. Actuellement, nous avons lancé un appel à candidature pour un programme qui s'appelle Emerging Mediterranean, pour faire de la Méditerranée un lab de la Tech for Good entre l'Europe et l'Afrique. Et en 20 jours, nous avons reçu déjà plus de 110 candidatures, dont un tiers sont des candidatures portées par des entrepreneuses, des projets portés par des fondatrices, des cofondatrices femmes de Libye, du Maroc, de Tunisie, d'Algérie et aussi de Mauritanie. Donc, très clairement, on voit aussi que le digital permet aussi cette émancipation et surtout cette accélération entrepreneuriale des femmes, notamment dans la région nord-africaine, vers justement cet entrepreneuriat de solutions. Et un dernier point pour conclure, lorsqu'on parle de monde d'après, on voit que tout ce qui se passe aujourd'hui fait émerger, grâce au digital, des solutions de demain qui sont en train de passer à l'échelle, qui étaient encore un peu anecdotiques sur le continent et qui sont aujourd'hui en train de passer à l'échelle. Je pense à la télémédecine, par exemple l'achat de médicaments sécurisés en ligne. Je pense à la téléconsultation qui d'ailleurs est de plus en plus assurée par l'intelligence artificielle, qui permet aussi quelque part de désengorger les structures de santé. Je pense à l'éducation, l'EdTech, du simple cours en ligne à la formation professionnelle et aux solutions de travail dématérialisé. Je pense aussi, bien entendu, au télétravail qui est en train d'exploser grâce au digital et qui a vraiment montré son importance pendant les périodes de confinement. Et je pense aussi, de manière croissante, au monde du loisir, à l'industrie créative et culturelle, qui s'appuie notamment sur la classe moyenne émergente avec le gaming, le streaming, l'e-sport, dont là aussi les consommations ont explosé au plus fort de la pandémie, pendant le confinement. Mais ça concerne bien entendu plus les classes moyennes et les solutions type télémédecine, éducation. Là, c'est vraiment de l'innovation, je dirais, pour les populations les plus fragiles, pour la base de la pyramide, pour les masses, l'innovation de masse. Et on voit qu'il y aura clairement un avant et un après Covid-19, notamment grâce et avec le digital.
Alors, vous avez jeté un pavé dans la mare, finalement, puisque vous avez présenté les grands avantages pour notre continent qu'aura cette disruption numérique. Par contre, vous avez aussi exposé finalement des faiblesses qu'on a remarquées globalement. Par exemple, on a vu des sociétés, une asymétrie au niveau global. On a vu des sociétés très avancées qui ont embrassé finalement ces technologies. La Corée du Sud, Singapour, dans la lutte d'ailleurs du Covid. Et on voit que finalement, ça n'a pas suivi de la même manière dans différents pays. Les applications n'ont pas connu un tel engouement, malheureusement, pour pouvoir endiguer cette pandémie. On voit que, bien entendu, il y a des questions de sécurité, de confiance dans le système. Et à ce moment-là, il s'agirait de voir, est-ce que ces problèmes-là sont vraiment structurels ou est-ce qu'ils peuvent être… finalement, on peut aller outre ces questions-là. Alors, c'est la raison pour laquelle je souhaiterais inviter Général Olivier Kempf, expert en cybersécurité. Bien entendu, toutes les questions de sécurité et de défense, je ne peux pas couvrir l'étendue de vos interventions dans de nombreuses institutions françaises, Polytechnique, Sciences Po Paris, l'École de guerre, HEC, et surtout votre ouvrage publié dès 2006, Gagner le cyberconflit en 2016. Alors, le cyberconflit, il a besoin d'avoir des effectifs, hein, bien entendu, et il faut mettre ces effectifs en confiance. Comment est-ce que vous pensez que, finalement, par rapport à nos sociétés, les sociétés émergentes, comment est-ce que vous pensez qu'on peut apporter la confiance dans ces nouveaux outils pour permettre finalement d'utiliser ce levier formidable, ce bond technologique de l'ère numérique? Olivier.
Bonjour à tous, bonjour cher ami, bonjour Brahim et merci encore de m'inviter. Moi je vous parle de France où la perception est probablement un peu différente de celle que vous avez en Afrique, vous tous qui êtes de l'autre côté de la Méditerranée, vu de mes yeux à moi en tout cas. J'aimerais tout d'abord évoquer un point, c'est-à-dire que ce choc de la pandémie, il a des effets différents selon les continents. Et c'est pour ça que je mentionne que je parle d'Europe de l'Ouest, c'est-à-dire qu'on est en train de parler en ce moment de deuxième vague. On a des bilans humains qui sont beaucoup plus forts que ce qu'on observe en Afrique. Tant mieux pour vous. Mais donc, on a eu un choc qui a provoqué des confinements et donc un très, très fort choc économique de dépression. Alors, vous le subissez en Afrique par contre-coup, pas de façon directe, mais c'est ça qui est important, c'est-à-dire que le confinement a suscité finalement, non pas un choc technologique, mais un choc d'habitude. Et le choc d'habitude, ça a été le passage massif au télétravail et à ce qu'on a appelé l'accélération de la transformation numérique. Il y avait une blague qui circulait sur Twitter qui a fait la transformation de votre organisation. Est-ce que c'est le CEO, donc le PDG? Est-ce que c'est le CDO, c'est-à-dire le fichier de transformation digitale? Chacun réunissait que 6%. Et en fait, qui est-ce qui a réellement fait la transformation numérique de votre organisation? C'est le Covid à 88%, enfin peu importe. C'était une blague, mais c'est très significatif parce qu'on a vu tout un tas, beaucoup d'organisations existantes qui travaillaient en ce qu'on appelle présentiel et qui ont dû subitement basculer dans l'urgence sans y être préparés sur des modalités de travail à distance. Et regardez ce que nous faisons aujourd'hui avec MEDays. Nous étions en présentiel et c'était très agréable et très sympathique et ça permettait d'ailleurs des échanges nombreux et nourris. Pas forcément seulement en estrade, mais aussi en coulisses, et c'était un des intérêts. Et là, nous sommes passés en visioconférence, ce qui est très bien aussi, mais qui donne une qualité forcément un peu différente. Tout ça pour dire que le distanciel, c'est bien, le présentiel, c'est bien aussi, mais que surtout, ça a provoqué une transformation digitale à marche forcée, pas toujours très, très bien conduite d'ailleurs, et qui a peut-être accru le fossé technologique. Je reviens à ce que disait Madame Irène Ochem, qui parlait de technological gap, et elle parlait de gender gap. Je crois qu'il y a aussi probablement un technological gap, c'est-à-dire comment est-ce que finalement les organisations, les pays, les structures vont conduire cette transformation digitale. C'est en désordre. Ça augmente aussi le risque à cause de ce désordre. Et ce qu'on a observé corrélativement avec la pandémie, avec cette transformation digitale, il y a eu une explosion ce qu'on appelle des cyberattaques ou des cyberagressions, avec notamment des cibles qu'on ne connaissait pas jusqu'à présent. Tous les établissements de santé ont été visés. J'imagine que c'est aussi la même chose en Afrique. On a eu une explosion de ce qu'on appelle le rançonnage, ransomware en anglais. Et puis, ça a beaucoup aussi touché les collectivités territoriales et les PME, PMI. C'est ça qu'il faut prendre en compte, c'est-à-dire qu'on avait l'impression que les cyberattaques étaient une histoire de grands comptes, d'États, de gros acteurs, de grosses sociétés, et puis les communes, les PME, les indépendants, les notaires, les médecins, les artisans se disaient « ça ne me touche pas ». On s'aperçoit aujourd'hui que ça leur touche. Et ça les touche aussi. Et c'est-à-dire que, certes, vous avez une transformation numérique, mais vous avez aussi une explosion de cette cybercriminalité, de cette cyberconflictualité qui va de pair. L'inconvénient, c'est que la pandémie provoque aussi une crise économique profonde. Alors, j'entends bien ce que dit Abdelkrim Samir, c'est-à-dire que vous avez du pivotement, vous avez des startups qui réagissent, c'est très bien, oui. Cela étant, je ne suis pas persuadé qu'au niveau macro, cela suffise et que cela entraîne une prise de conscience de la nécessité de la cybersécurité. Et d'ailleurs, on a vu une certaine stagnation, voire baisse des budgets de sécurité, de cybersécurité des grands comptes, parce qu'ils devaient réduire leurs coûts à cause de la crise économique. Et du côté des startups, la préoccupation de sécurité n'est malheureusement, et je fréquente moi aussi un peu le milieu des startups, pas la première préoccupation. Donc, tout ça pour dire qu'on a des mouvements qui sont divergents, qu'on a une augmentation du risque et que, alors, je me mets enfin du point de vue africain et nous là-dedans. Eh bien, profitez-en effectivement pour encourager toutes ces initiatives, ces startups, ces réponses locales aux nouvelles situations, parce que ce n'est pas seulement à la pandémie, c'est aussi aux nouvelles conditions économiques et sociales qui accompagnent cette pandémie, et donc essayer de trouver des réponses, trouver des opportunités. Je travaille là aussi avec un certain nombre de sociétés, de PME qui cherchent elles aussi à profiter de la crise pour refonder leur modèle, reconduire leur modèle, trouver de nouveaux marchés. Il faut le faire, et il faut le faire aussi avec un souci de sécurité des solutions que l'on va proposer. Parce que vous parlez de résilience, hein, je ne sais plus qui, je crois que c'est Jean-Paul qui avait évoqué le mot résilience, et je crois que c'est un mot très important. La résilience, c'est une résilience économique, c'est une résilience de réaction, de riposte de notre tissu économique et social, mais ça doit aussi prendre en compte la question de sécurité. Et si on parle de digital et de transformation numérique, il faut aussi penser à cette sécurité numérique. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Olivier. En fait, c'est justement la question que je souhaiterais poser à Dr Abderahhman Chabib. Finalement, est-ce que ces technologies disruptives, elles ne feront pas est-ce qu'elles ne vont pas exacerber finalement des failles et des différences dans nos sociétés, particulièrement sur le continent africain? Alors, vous êtes directeur exécutif de l'Académie italienne diplomatique, qui a bien entendu une représentation en tant qu'ONG auprès des Nations Unies à New York. Et vous avez été très actif à travers son agenda pour informer, inspirer, mobiliser la société civile et la jeunesse, pour accompagner finalement des structures également multilatérales. On a eu une session sur le multilatéralisme hier notamment. Alors finalement, l'exacerbation de ces failles et comment aller de l'avant sur le continent.
Bonjour, c'est Khalid. Permettez-moi de remercier l'Institut Amadeus pour cette invitation à laquelle je participe avec immense plaisir, même si en virtuel. Et pour commencer, mon intervention sera en anglais, et pendant la discussion, je vais switcher en français. It is evident that the COVID pandemic is exposing a large divide between high-income, upper-middle-income countries and poorer countries in digital usage and the availability of technology solutions to support the pandemic responses. Despite this divide, disruptive technologies are enabling numerous responses to the COVID pandemic in emerging markets and societies. Technologies adopted include online healthcare, blockchain-based epidemic monitoring platforms, robots that deliver food and medication, and so on. Most importantly is that this has forced a switch to online education platforms and home-based working solutions. And in some countries, also the most advanced ones, to robotics and 3D planning technologies to manage social distancing. Governments have employed digital platforms, big data analytics, and artificial intelligence to provide social welfare programs, which are often paid out using mobile money. The contribution of technology companies to COVID response varies across sectors and is dependent on the presence of relatively developed digital ecosystems. It is to be noted that the importance of youth in the engagement in this process of digitalization is playing a pivotal role. Mostly if we think that in the last years, many of the MENA countries, so Middle East and North Africa, were trying to work hard to integrate the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals in their National Development Plan. Well, I think that the COVID pandemic presents an opportunity to put the SDGs at the very center of the stabilization and recovery efforts. The importance of SDGs stems from the tangible benefits they provide to different economies under stress from the pandemic. Of course, for non-oil economies, the pandemic reinforces the need for resilient and renewable energy. So this is an opportunity also for those countries, among them Morocco, the Kingdom of Morocco, to play a central role in advancing technology in renewable energy systems that can withstand trade disruption in line with SDG 7 of affordable clean energy. For economies with a substantial informal sector, SDG number 1 of no poverty affirms the need for effective support for economies and critical groups contributing to the socio-economic fabric of a country. The SDG framework can serve as a blueprint for determining a response to the crisis and ensure inclusive and diversified economic growth that is consistent with national medium and long-term plans. We can all note that we are assisting in a very rapid changing environment. All governments should envisage processes and politics so to accelerate the digitalization which is needed. And this is a process which is dated and has to be effective within 2 years' time. Of course, youth can play an important role if we think about education and all who are in the process of building up their competencies. As I used to say, the COVID pandemic has revealed to be a real jump forward in the digital era, and countries that will not have evolved accordingly will unlikely resist to the global market's new challenges. So the population, so the youth, which are building themselves so to be competitive and to integrate the market, if they do not evolve, they do not build their digital skills, they will unlikely to be effective for the needs that the new companies and the new way of working, which is required.
I think it would be nice if we can go back to the debate, and we obviously noted that, and I apologize for interrupting you. We obviously noted that the pandemic has actually, for the first time in a generation, changed the Human Development Index worldwide, which fell back in a generation. It's the first time that it's happening, and obviously raises inequalities, and this is likely to have an effect on the post-COVID era. So this is almost why I'd like to introduce our next speaker, and I want to make sure we have a dynamic conversation throughout. We'll have questions from the audience, which are coming in as we speak. And basically, I'd like to introduce Scott Goodstein, who's in Washington, D.C., and who actually launched Revolution Messaging. You were active in the Obama for President online campaign, which actually, thanks to the internet, brought disruption in what we would have expected in US traditional politics. We've seen also how the pandemic has also affected electoral process with lots of participations, record high participations. We know how polarized the society is. I'd like to go back to the very name of your platform, Revolution Messaging. Do you think that the world is likely to witness a revolution post-COVID, seeing the discrepancy, the inequalities, and the inclusiveness, at least vocal inclusiveness and participation in electoral processes? Scott, the floor is yours. Would you like to address this?
Yeah, I think that post-COVID, you're seeing more participation in the US. So you just saw record high numbers of turnout in a country that does not require participation in elections and has been traditionally low. At this point, while some of the final votes are still being tallied and resolved, you will see that people that have been affected, as some of the earlier panelists said, women in the US, minorities, people of color have been disproportionately affected by COVID. The working class that is out doing hard work on the front lines or shopping and doing grocery delivery have been disproportionately affected. And so you are seeing people become super political for the first time. In the US, there's a campaign called Save Our Stages. Some groups around the world were very involved in saving their arts and cultural institutions during COVID. In the US, the independent nightclubs that were considered the first to close and will be the last to open are now organizing and becoming involved. These are nightclub owners and musicians and bartenders that have never wanted to be political, are now becoming super political. They're organizing to try and not just get PPE, but they're also organizing to try and get some government assistance. And so while other countries have handled this much better than the US and has protected institutions, this is becoming a hyper-politicized in every aspect of life. The only other thing I would like to add to this is that young people are not waiting for government. So there's a group in the US called Invisible Hands that basically say we're going to help the elderly and we're going to do grocery delivery and we're not going to wait until the government. So it was 3 kids that started it on Facebook, and so it's now over 15,000 volunteers in the New York metro area. So I know everybody gets down and dejected about the negative side of the internet, but during COVID, you've really seen a lot of listservs and a lot of community organizations happen in real time. So parents helping each other out, and to young kids actually going and doing a lot of meal delivery around the US.
So revolution or not revolution post-COVID in the United States? And what do you think about the situation of Africa, which has a tremendous proportion of youth in its population?
Yeah, I think youth worldwide are stepping up, and I think that the internet has been a great catalyst for people to actually see positive change. And so whether that's international world looking at the justice movements and the rallies that have been happening in the streets in the US on discrimination has been happening worldwide. And so I do see that there's the hopes of a soft revolution of young people stepping up and becoming more community active than even my generation of Gen X that was not as active in helping save the world.
Thank you. Thank you. That basically is a nice transition to our next speaker, Dr. Stuart Thompson, and who's a specialist in public affairs and communications, PR, also, obviously, that's the way it's referred to. You obviously have been involved for many years in what is called new activism. And I'd like to have a take. You obviously wrote a book, New Activism and Corporate Response. So basically, the title of your book says it all. What do you have to say about political establishment and corporates when they are confronted to a revolution thanks to the internet technologies and the digital revolution?
Thank you, and thanks again for the invite to address the conference. It's a great pleasure to be here again, although this time North London rather than Tangier. I think I'll follow on from what Scott was talking about, actually, because I think a lot of the themes that he highlighted there are what we see, across the world. And one of those key drivers of potential change is that role played by central government during COVID, as opposed to what communities across countries want. And what we've seen is central government sort of taking back control, if I can use that phrase, which was used a lot during Brexit. And it's central government deciding what money is spent where, what technology is used to try and track and trace to try and help challenge the spread of COVID, whilst at the same time communities themselves want more control. So again, as Scott said, there are individual initiatives coming forward using the technology that's available to try and do things locally. So I think one of the key issues that we're going to have to all deal with is this sort of continuation of strong central governments, as opposed to what communities and business want, which is more control over themselves. And I think central government is going to find that very, very difficult to let go of. And if you look at some of the communications, particularly here in the UK, but I'm sure further afield as well, it's been quite traditional. It's been a lot of the communications has been, based around the sort of the, 3 words and 3 phrases to try and capture people's imagination. So stay home, protect the NHS, save lives being a key one here, or hands, face, space, and then cascading that out through whatever channels that happen to be available to them, but very much sort of keeping control. So that potential clash between central governments and communities wanting more control, and social media as well as technology more generally can help play a big role in that. But I think what we've also seen for businesses, because I think a lot of this is still questions.
Sorry,
because
before you go into businesses, I'm very sorry to interrupt you. Before you go into businesses,
sure.
Basically, how do you think that this technological revolution will affect, in fact, the very governance of societies? How do you think that interface will play out?
I think I was going to say, I mean, there are, I think, just a huge number of questions. Now, if I was to sort of look forward, and if I was part of a sort of any government, I would look at this as the opportunity to open up, to be more transparent, to involve communities and businesses and others in decision making through, more consultation, making information more readily available. So using the technology and the platforms that are there and will come through to do that. So it could make a massive difference to the way that government operates. My fear is that governments retrench, especially with the challenges of climate change, but particularly the economy, where most governments across the world have been spending, a lot of money supporting communities and supporting businesses, that they think, actually, look, we need to stay in control of this. So if we need to get out of this economic predicament, we need to get out of this climate change issue. So we will keep control. So my fear is that actually it goes backwards, not forwards, whilst at the same time the communities are trying to push governments in a more sort of devolved and open way. So I'm afraid I'm not sure I have an answer to that. I have a fear, and I hope that I'm very wrong, and I hope that governments do open up, but I'm not convinced.
It's a very Keynesian answer to basically the role of the state in the recovery packages. And I did interrupt you on the corporate response, which obviously I'd like to hear more about. What do you have to say about corporate and digital technologies, the massive growth of tech companies, of Internet of Things, the infrastructure that are coming in? Basically, how is that going to integrate the governance structures in particular?
Well, again, I think that, there are challenges there. For many businesses, we've all tended, and again, I'm thinking more of the sort of, Western Europe and the States here. But in particular, look, most of us have been relying on Teams and Zoom and basically, in effect, US tech firms and the packages that they offer. And I know around the world, some Chinese companies, and in Africa as well, there's Ding Talk and WeChat Work and others. So there are other platforms as well. But for governments, on the one hand, we need their products to continue to work. And a lot of these sorts of, this sort of work, remote working and remote conferences, will no doubt continue. So we need the technology, but on the other hand, we are still concerned about the amount of tax they pay. We are still concerned about the way that they treat our security and our data and our personal information. And for some, governments in particular, if there is a continued concentration in a few platforms, there will be sort of competition issues potentially as well, especially, and apologies to Scott and and the whole of the US here, but particularly if the US companies. Now that may change as Biden starts to when it is officially confirmed and all the counts are in, etc. That may start to change under a Biden presidency, but as things stand at the moment, a lot of countries do have particular questions about the way that some of these sort of companies operate. So and I suppose the other part about how businesses have operated during COVID is, and again, it's a little similar to the discussions between sort of central governments and communities, is that businesses themselves have had to trust their workers more. I say workers in a widest sense, but they've had to trust us to basically sit in our spare rooms or lofts or wherever we happen to be, and continue to do work and continue to be productive. So that will continue to be a challenge for businesses. And I think just one final point, if I may, which is actually a lot of the reputational challenges that businesses have faced during COVID have actually been quite, again, traditional. So it's been the way that they've treated their workers. It's been the way that they have laid people off or not. It's been about how much money they take from government at the same time as paying shareholders. And that's led to a lot of companies having sort of, coming under huge media and political scrutiny. But they're not really to do with tech. They're just to do with sort of good business behavior and understanding what people want. So, even on a very basic level, businesses continue to make fairly fundamental errors in their communications and their approaches. So let's hope that they learn something in the coming months as well.
Thank you very much. Obviously, for sustaining a digital revolution, particularly on the African continent, where you have all the ingredients of youth and technology. I had mentioned, obviously, the upcoming 5G, the networks, which are very much adapted to the African continent, because you don't need the traditional copper laying cables, etc. So there's going to be a significant technological leap. But that begs a question that I'd like to ask to Irène, namely in what can be done to upskilling the workforce and women in particular on the African continent, making sure that we don't miss this historic opportunity to have an inclusive revolution or transition or leap towards the digital era.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, what can be done? I should think we should start with revamping the education system in many African countries and enacting policies, okay, that mainstreaming gender sensitive policies that can enhance that, support that, and assure implementation too. Enacting policies that can help youth target the right education, the right skills education, especially technical and TVET, technical education. There is a lot of our education curriculum, academic work is not suited, for the future work requirements. So we need to focus attention on educating young people, okay, technically, finding out what industry sectors, what skills do industry sectors require, and then focus on educating people for those skills so that they can fit into the job market requirements, instead of rolling out people who cannot fit in with the job requirements. Technology will not go away. It can only transform more and more, and then we are left with a wider margin of trying to catch up. We were already always catching up on the continent on technology and other things. Now with COVID, with the pandemic, everything has been amplified. Every challenge has been multiplied. So it's going to be critical for policymakers to take this into consideration and make relevant, supportive, and gender inclusive mainstream gender policies and youth, and invest in that, in supporting them and also creating awareness of these opportunities so that they can leverage that. On our own part, as an organization, a Pan-African organization that is driving women entrepreneurship, most of our activities are actually focused on entrepreneurial skills training, because that is lacking. So to be able to help these women bridge that entrepreneurial knowledge and skills, that is where they start. Then we can start to address all the other challenges that they encounter, accessing finance, accessing market, having the network, the right networks, and interconnections, because it's useless trying to present a business to a potential investor when you don't have everything in place still. So there is a need for that entrepreneurial skills training, to use technology, e-commerce, where it's possible to jump into it, to widen your access to markets. both.
But there is, Irène, a structural challenge, I'm afraid. We know that African countries invest tremendously already in their education system because they obviously have a very young population. And my question pertains essentially to the generation gap and the capacities needed to carry out this transformation. How do you think, educators that are perhaps not very versed in new technologies can bridge that gap to train future generations to leap into this technology? And this is a question I'd like to address to you, and I'd like Jean-Paul to follow up on it if he may. Go ahead, Irène, please. How, teachers are older generations. We got young kids that know how to handle the internet much better than their educators. So the governments are investing heavily in education. So there is a gap here. How do you bridge that gap?
Well, to bridge that gap, I would say also to use younger people, okay, to train young people too. So there is no need. Most of our government people in many African countries, they are people that should be giving way to young people to step in. Young people who know what their fellow young people need and want, okay, to design programs, or if the government is designing these programs, to make sure that they include young people into the design, starting with the design of programs that we target other younger people, okay, to address challenges. So that is what I could say.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Jean-Paul, would you like to jump in?
Okay, so I would like to jump in right at the point where you mentioned, and Irene talked about the education investments, in air quotes, by governments. I actually challenge that proposition that we're not making investments in education, because it's logical that if you make an investment, you expect a return. Now, the way education is currently structured on the African continent, it is skewed in favor of the professors and the university lecturers. It's skewed that way so that they get paid. Nobody talks about, or nobody guarantees what you get after you go through a university in Africa. So on what basis are we measuring it? I know if I want to get into a higher institution in Europe or the Americas, I see things like our graduates have a high placement rate. These are the kind of industries and companies they work in. So you sell me on the opportunity of attending school. So I know the investment of my school fees will get me a return. In Africa, nobody's talking about what young people get after you graduate from school. Nobody cares if you get a job. They just put you in class for 4 years. They dump the information on you. They make sure the teachers and the lecturers get paid, but you pay all that school fees. The government invests all that money. There's no return. So if we skew the setup of our education system such that the emphasis is on the return that the young people get from school, what you're going to start to see is that people would start to look at the end results of the education service they are rendering. We would then start to think, does it really make sense to teach people this way when it's no longer relevant in the industry? You're going to start seeing lecturers asking, what does the industry want? What is applicable today? What are the trends going into the future? And then the curriculum will be designed based on that. Right now, the system is skewed in favor of the teachers. Nobody's measuring anything. And the biggest losers are the people who attend school, pay school fees, come out with a certificate, and they don't have any jobs to show for it. Now, I would like to segue nicely into more or less the heart of this conversation about what the opportunities are for our young people. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was an announcement of an acquisition of a startup, a Nigerian startup, 2 founders, young people below 30 years, an acquisition of $200 million by a global payments giant, which is Stripe. Stripe is coming out of the US. Now, what you're beginning to see is that a clear message is being sent. These young guys made this money on the basis of innovation, on the basis of something they built outside of school. So this is not somebody who got a degree in school, went out and got a solid job. This is somebody who has created a company, employed people, and had just, experienced a major exit. Now, this acquisition by Skype does two very interesting things. It sends a positive message to the investment ecosystem in the West that, you know, you can choose to believe everything you see on the news, that Africa more or less is a poor case, it's a charity case. All you can do with Africa is philanthropy, or you can choose to buy the story that there is an opportunity here. And these guys are making big money. And sometimes the challenge that the West has in understanding Africa is, can you really make money from poor people? That's usually the question. Africa is poor, there's no money to be made there. But then I like to always draw them back to say, there are essentially two ways you can make money in any business. You can make money by margin, or you can make money by volume. Africa has the volume. Any way you wing it. So if you have scalable systems here that solve real problems, that can add real value to people, even poor people are willing to make sacrifices to get good stuff. And this is just in financial services. I haven't even talked about retail investing. There's this new app, there's an app I tried recently, also by West African entrepreneurs, that allows you to invest in the local stock market and in the US stock market from your phone, from your device. When I started investing in the stock market, I had to send emails to a broker who would then execute the orders. Now I'm able to do it on my phone. Now, what these young people are doing is they are challenging and disrupting traditional industries. And most times, these guys at the top don't even see that their lunch is being stolen. And then maybe when they realize what's happening is when they hear exits like this, $200 million and stuff like that, the only way they respond is to apply taxes, to start looking for a way to regulate the industry and squeeze money out of it.
Okay, basically, what you're describing is basically low-hanging fruits, opportunities for growth for the continent. Basically, should we review the educational system and put a much stronger emphasis on digital technologies, which are probably a lot easier to implement, to train, and compared to the return we can get. I mean, obviously, if you train a younger generation how to be more professional, more active with these technologies, perhaps you can have, obviously you can leap, and with very little investments, it seems. What's your opinion on that?
My perspective on the matter is that I think we are approaching the problem from the wrong direction, and that is this. Right now across Africa, policymakers, politicians, and governments don't have the incentive or the motivation to change the way things are. Because don't forget, the way things are right now favors them. They get a lot of grants and donations and aid from foreign governments, and these millions of dollars are invested in education. We are not surprised that we're not seeing results, because those monies are not yielding results on the ground. But then you approach it from the other side. Young people show up with innovative ways to learn, which is an opportunity that COVID has further opened. These guys are building software that make it easy for schools to go digital, you know, and then pay some subscription. Now, this is happening on the ground. The market is voting with their money, and the regulators are just waiting for people to come back to school, and they're engaging in negotiations with organized labor and teacher organizations. These guys just don't get it. And if we continue to have conversations about making them get it, I think we're wasting our time. Rather, we should shift our emphasis on supporting these entrepreneurs who are attacking the problems directly, who are focusing on producing value, and then the market is voting for them. So I think we should allow the market to vote. If we allow the market vote for private ventures or platforms where people can get quality education and be assured of something outside of it. So you attend the training, you get a skill, you know you can monetize that skill and get employed, or you can go vote for your regular government institution or university that is funded by the public sector and then see what you get outside of it. So people are beginning to realize that they are not getting a return on their investment on higher education. We have a lot of young people, well-trained, graduated, but all they have is a paper that says you're a graduate, but they don't have any market-ready skills. So we need to skew the conversation to the market. Let the market decide. Let the market decide. The young entrepreneurs should build platforms. The government should continue doing what they want to do. Let the market decide.
Okay, Dr. Thompson, obviously governments, how can they adapt to this new normal?
I think that those challenges of existing institutions, whether they are, as Jean-Paul was talking about, educational in Africa, or their education hold-ups here as well of a different type and scale, obviously, but challenges nonetheless, and government, and trying to get them to act in a different way and think differently is just a huge challenge. I mean, I don't think anybody is. I mean, I wouldn't claim to have an answer to something like that. I mean, just as we're speaking today, there's changes in the way that the Prime Minister here and his advisors are working, and a number of his advisors have decided to leave Downing Street. And I mentioned that more in the fact that these people that have just left were meant to be disruptors. They were meant to be people that would come in and shake up the way that government works and have maybe more of an entrepreneurial approach, or and be much more familiar with the technology that we've been talking about today as well. They've gone. Now, you can read that in a number of ways, but one would be that actually they've tried to do the disruption, but frankly, the existing institutions, if you like, have won, and there's no escaping the constraints that we already have. So I think that's one reading of it. I think another reading of it from that I would point to in terms of opportunities is because of that inertia in some Western countries, and I would include the UK in that as well, but particularly around Brexit, are the market opportunities for the entrepreneurs and those developing new products. Again, as Jean-Paul was talking about there, in a couple of very clear examples, for outward investment into the UK post-Brexit, but also the trade deal. So this is very much an inward and outward opportunity, as I see it, for African businesses, African countries, particularly because of the historic relationship between ourselves and many of the countries across the continent as well. So I think it's not all sort of doom and gloom. It's not all it's not just about institutional inertia. There are opportunities out there, but it takes time and it takes effort, and it takes people such as the ones on the call today to try and unblock the system. But there's not one easy solution as far as I see it anyway.
Okay, let's now, obviously no easy solution. We're stuck, obviously. And when we reach a situation like that, our last resort is, of course, the military and defense. Now, strategically, Olivier, comment est-ce qu'on peut stratégiquement préparer un pays à cette révolution digitale? Les enjeux sont tellement grands. Finalement, un État stratège, qu'est-ce qu'il peut faire pour justement accompagner cette révolution digitale vraiment dans le cadre d'une guerre économique pour essayer de survivre dans l'ère post-Covid?
Vaste question. Si on le savait, ce serait simple. Il y a plusieurs tentatives. Ce qui est intéressant, et je rejoins un peu ce que disait Stuart Thompson, c'est qu'on sent une prise de conscience européenne, et je ne doute pas qu'elle suivra en Afrique, une prise de conscience européenne de la notion d'autonomie stratégique. On va parler d'autonomie et pas d'indépendance, qui prend en compte politiquement d'ailleurs, disons les choses, l'attitude des États-Unis depuis plusieurs années. Ça a été évidemment accéléré par Donald Trump, mais ça avait déjà commencé auparavant, un certain rift across the Atlantic, un certain fossé qui est en train de s'élargir petit à petit, au moins politiquement et économiquement et culturellement, et donc stratégiquement, entre les deux rives de l'Atlantique. J'en veux pour preuve que sur le sujet qui nous intéresse aujourd'hui, on voit de plus en plus les mots de souveraineté numérique apparaître et être discutés en Europe, et pas seulement en France. C'est ça qui est assez intéressant. Je regarde ce que fait l'OTAN, je regarde ce que fait l'Union européenne notamment, et on voit de plus en plus d'initiatives. Prenez pour exemple le RGPD GDPR. Le RGPD qui a été lancé donc maintenant il y a un peu plus de 2 ans par l'Union européenne, et qui devient un standard qui a été mis en œuvre par nombre de pays à travers le monde, et notamment au Maroc. Vous avez été un des premiers pays non européens à le suivre, et bravo. Mais on voit maintenant que vous avez un certain nombre de pays, y compris des États américains, qui le suivent, et c'est très bien. Donc, on voit qu'il y a des initiatives européennes qui réussissent à s'imposer en dehors de cette domination des plateformes que mentionnait Stuart. Plateformes qui sont d'ailleurs pas seulement américaines, hein, on parle beaucoup des GAFAM, mais il ne faut pas oublier ce qu'on appelle aussi les BATX, et donc toutes les plateformes chinoises qui ont créé un écosystème d'ailleurs proprement chinois, mais pas seulement. TikTok, c'est chinois, et regardez d'ailleurs la réaction américaine à TikTok, la volonté de, entre guillemets, nationaliser TikTok pour éviter justement les fuites de données qui pourraient intervenir au travers de TikTok. Ce qui est intéressant avec TikTok, c'est qu'ils ont inventé, les Chinois, mais les Européens pourraient le faire aussi. Les Chinois ont inventé un nouveau modèle qui est devenu finalement un standard. Et en fait, le problème, et notamment c'est vrai pour les Européens et pour les Africains, si on veut de la souveraineté numérique, il ne faut pas chercher probablement à concurrencer les plateformes existantes, parce qu'on n'y arrivera pas, parce qu'elles sont là, et qu'elles sont tellement pratiques qu'elles sont en situation de monopole. En revanche, ce qu'il faut, c'est prendre le virage technologique des nouvelles technologies qui n'ont pas encore de monopole de fait, de standard de fait. Et là, avec des marchés, et je reviens à ce que disait Jean-Paul, avec la taille des marchés, 500 millions d'habitants en Europe, pour faire simple, et plus d'1 milliard en Afrique, là, on a une base de marché sur lequel on peut établir finalement des usages, et c'est les usages qui vont créer finalement les grands champions. Je crois que c'est l'avenir, c'est-à-dire prendre des tournants technologiques nouveaux et pas essayer de concurrencer les bases établies. Il faut faire ça à plusieurs. Et là, c'est l'autre message que je voudrais lancer. Si les Européens et les Africains se mettaient ensemble, justement sur cette base de marché de plus de 1,5 milliard à 2 milliards d'habitants, là, on pourrait imposer des standards sur des besoins nouveaux, des usages nouveaux, et donc des technologies nouvelles, et donc des plateformes nouvelles.
Ah ben, vous avez lancé finalement le pavé dans la mare d'une grande question finalement de tout ce qui est numérique. On sait que un des grands problèmes auxquels le continent est confronté, c'est, bon, je vais parler en anglais, le brain drain. Comment, j'ai une question, je vous la lis. How can African government prevent the brain drain of its engineers and technicians? Dans le secteur des nouvelles technologies, secteur numérique. Maybe I can ask Jean-Paul to respond to that, perhaps.
Okay, so if we're trying to, of course, we can't hold people back. We can only entice them and make it worth their stay to stay back. But if they don't want to, if people don't want to stay, they don't want to stay. If the environment is not helpful. But I'm seeing an interesting trend here. You remember the guys who just exited for $200 million? Those kinds of people, I'm beginning to see that smart Africans go abroad, they study, and when they realize the gap between the West and Africa, they instantly see that the opportunities in Africa. Sometimes people need that perspective. When you're within the continent, the grass is greener on the other side. But then when you get to the other side and then you realize there's really not much to build in the West. And then even if you have to build it, the barriers are still, quite there, and then the obstacles are quite higher. But in Africa, you have a green field. It's an open space. There's huge demand. There's a lot of, it's like a test bed for innovation. So what I'm beginning to see is that we have our brain drain. People leave the continent to go get exposure and education, but a fraction of those people come back to build things. And it is that fraction that's really helping to change the continent. They're the ones who are providing the perspectives. In fact, there's this guy, I need to give him special attention because of what I'm about to explain. Iwuoha is a Nigerian entrepreneur. I think he studied in the US. He created a company in West Africa called Andela. Now, what Andela does is Andela gets young people, graduates from university, runs them through a training program and certifies them as engineers. They're still in Nigeria, right? So they work for top companies, Google, Facebook, all of them, remotely as software developers, programmers, and things like that. Now, what Iwuoha did was, while he was studying outside, he founded a company with an American, I think it's an American or a Canadian, as his co-founder. Now, these guys who are leaving the continent are actually helping us attract attention to Africa. They are bringing in expertise, they are bringing in solutions, and they're helping to explore the opportunities over here. So yes, brain drain is a problem, but on the other side, it's an opportunity. Because if our people don't go out, they don't see glaringly the opportunity that Africa is until they see the grass on the other side, and then they start to appreciate this other side.
It's also an interesting time we live in because of the pandemic. Obviously, you cannot go and see the grass on the other side. You are obviously much more involved in your respective region where you operate. Couldn't we envision a different perception, actually, or an opportunity for a bottom-up process in terms of digital entrepreneurship on the continent, for example?
Okay, so it's possible. If what you're asking for is an organic change from within the continent, we need to understand what the constraints on the systems are. I explained the education system. It's rigged in favor of the people who oversee that system are the lecturers. The people who actually go to the school don't get anything in return. We can go from sector to sector, and what you see is more or less, I don't want to call it a glass ceiling, it's actually worse than that. So we are in a system where you cannot change the system from inside because nobody inside has enough incentive or motivation to change from inside. We virtually have to change the system from the outside, and we're doing it in several different ways. We had a major social movement in Nigeria, End Police Brutality. The government didn't know where it hit them from. And these were young people who organized this thing on social media. I was at one of the rallies and I couldn't believe my eyes. I saw things I haven't seen before, a level of organization, sophistication, and coordination among the youth that I've never seen before. There was no issue of religion, no issue of tribe. Everybody was working toward one goal. And in all of this, I could only see social media. Social media made that possible. Now you have a government who cannot regulate social media like they regulate the radio and TV and things like that. So these are the kinds of opportunities we're seeing. Disruption from the outside that is forcing the inside to adapt and concede to some needs that young people need. I think that's the best way forward. If we're going to ask the people on the inside to change, I don't think so.
So that opens up the next question addressed to you, in fact, most likely. How can the financial sector adapt to the startup needs in this case? Okay,
so we need to change the way, now this is targeted at the banking industry because, and I say this because when most entrepreneurs want to raise money, they think of the banks. And that speaks to the level of unsophistication of the finance industry here. So the venture capital industry, which basically finances most of the tech startups out of the US, is a very vibrant ecosystem. We don't even have that here. Before you even talk of venture capital, you need to talk about an angel investor base. We don't have them here. Rich Africans, wealthy Africans are not investing in startups. They're investing in real estate, they're investing in gold, they're buying houses overseas, but they're not investing in young people. The reverse is the case in areas like the West and even China. We're starting to see that wealthy people are deploying some part of their capital to help younger people and upstarts. So if we're going to have a conversation about financing businesses, it's a much more holistic conversation that goes beyond just the banking industry. Even the way we assess businesses for funding, there's something wrong with it. You can't be asking a tech startup for collateral, for unmovable assets, house, land. These young guys don't have that stuff. There needs to be another way to gauge that somebody is credible and trustworthy. If we have a credit rating agency, that could be possible. Guess what? Young people are already building it. The credit agencies that we have right now are using a combination of your footprint on social media, your activity on your phone. They're using a lot of interesting and creative ways to find out if somebody is creditworthy. And it's working because they're giving out monies and people are paying back. In fact, there's a client of mine who focuses only on financing women entrepreneurs. She doesn't use any of the basic or conventional methods for testing creditworthiness. And she has a default rate that's below 1%. So these things can work, but we need to rethink the system. That's essentially how I see it.
Okay, Scott, you managed to mobilize novel financing sources for political campaigns. Do you think that widespread financing outreach can be mobilized for sustaining startups or businesses as well? Do you think that the political model can be transposed with crowdfunding for the supporting startups in globally, and how would you see that unfold in Africa?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what Jean-Paul is saying is the problem, and he nailed it, being that there's not a ecosystem. Silicon Valley took years and years to have all these angel funders figure things out. And so crowdfunding has taken a while in the US to work for political. You know, there needed to be a culture and a trust that people would give money online. So my mom and dad weren't able to give money online. They didn't trust it 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And now with social media, trustworthy payment gateways, and other utilities, you are now able to raise more money faster than ever before. And we're moving that into crowdfunding even in the US. The Obama administration allowed Security Exchange Commission in the US to allow larger crowdfunding opportunities for businesses. And we're now doing things like funding public work projects and public utilities that weren't being funded before. So if there's a water project that is a few $1 million instead of going to a bond, you can now actually just crowdfund and get that project done. So going back to what I said earlier, young people aren't waiting for their governments anymore. They're going to be able to figure it out. So Africa will be able to now reach out through social media and through US crowdfunding platforms and seek ideas in a global marketplace. So if African investors aren't coming through, you're going to now see rich investors in Europe think that they're a good idea. So I think the good idea is going to win out. One last thing, and I'd like to go back to what Stuart said, is that this is a switch for governments. Governments in the banking industry, like being the ruling class. And now that's being turned on its head, where you're no longer waiting for your government to allow you to do this. You're no longer waiting for a bank loan to allow you to do this. You can have 4 people and an idea and put it on a crowdfunding platform anywhere in the world. So the second that people now have this internet access to different forms of crowdfunding platforms, they will be able to have access to capital that they weren't able to have access to 5 years ago. And so I think that some of these lines of not being able to have access to resources for African startups is going to disappear the more that these crowdfunding platforms gain in popularity, because you're now giving a whole new generation access to capital that they couldn't get before.
And if I can sort of just add to that, I think the COVID situation adds to that momentum, or potentially adds to that momentum, particularly amongst young youth, the youth across the world. Frankly, in all likelihood, they are going to lose out from the traditional economy as we can't get growth back and forth. They're just going to have to look for different opportunities. Certainly in this country, as graduates come out, as Jean-Paul said, they can see the potential benefits of investing in their education, because in the past they would always get good jobs with, I don't know, accountancy firms or management consultants or where they ended up. That's not going to be the case. That's not going to be the case for a good few years until the economy recovers. You'll also have challenges around, I know there's, vaccines that are being, rolled out, and obviously Morocco and around the world, and we've got the Pfizer one when that becomes fully available. But it's likely that older generations will be the first in the queue for that, not younger generations. And again, I think Scott mentioned earlier on around climate change. The younger generations are hungry to change things, and frankly, COVID will just give them more incentive to do that, because frankly, otherwise, nobody else is going to help them.
That's precisely a question asked about this issue from Abdelmajid Farsi via Facebook, and he's basically asking whether digital in the time of COVID, is it complementary to what we've seen or disruptive?
I would say it's complementary. So I think it's just poured fuel on a fire. That's exactly what it did. On all counts, virtual education, financial services, urban logistics, the list goes on, e-commerce, everything benefited from this trend. So there were people here who were die-hard physical people. They would always want to go to a bank to do transactions. Many of them are much older, but COVID made a very strong case for digital. And even though many of those people had legitimate reasons, like a couple of them had been scammed before, their accounts wiped out, but then they see that digital is non-negotiable. You have to learn to live with it. So I think it's accelerated the opportunities that already existed before it.
Okay, a question for Olivier. Finalement, les pays en développement, de quelle manière est-ce qu'ils pourraient développer leur autonomie digitale, essayer d'émuler ou de lancer des modèles comme la Silicon Valley, de la créativité, et par rapport aux différentes plateformes, on a vu comment le Covid a permis également à des modèles chinois de montrer leur résilience face à des crises. Est-ce que justement ce modèle numérique chinois, est-ce qu'il peut avoir des applications dans les pays en développement? De quelle manière est-ce que ces pays-là pourraient développer une certaine autonomie stratégique en matière de technologie digitale?
En faisant juste leur métier, parce que je ne crois pas que les États, aujourd'hui, peuvent tout faire. On est sorti de la planification et je le dis d'autant plus qu'en France, on a recréé récemment un commissariat au plan, ce qui est quelque part un peu absurde dans le monde un peu complexe que nous vivons et où finalement on n'arrive pas à contrôler. Je veux dire, tous les témoignages ici mentionnent ces initiatives qui viennent du bas, cette impossibilité de contrôler justement, et tant mieux d'ailleurs, finalement la jeunesse, les citoyens, la population qui ont tous des initiatives grâce au digital. Le rôle d'un État, et ça c'est à la portée de tous les États, mais chacun à la mesure de ses moyens, le rôle d'un État, c'est de créer les conditions. Les conditions, je pense qu'elles sont de deux types. Vous avez des conditions techniques et c'est d'abord des infrastructures. Et donc, il faut développer les possibilités d'accès justement au numérique, mais techniquement. Et l'avantage, c'est que les coûts d'infrastructure du numérique sont aujourd'hui moins chers que ça pouvait l'être autrefois. Je prends l'exemple du téléphone. Autrefois, il fallait poser des câbles, des fils, des relais, etc., etc. Maintenant, ce sont des antennes, ce qui allège grandement, finalement, l'infrastructure nécessaire. Donc, d'une part, la notion d'infrastructure, et puis d'autre part, je dirais des conditions réglementaires et de régulation et de sécurité juridique, c'est-à-dire favoriser justement les initiatives et les sécuriser. Permettre justement, par exemple, que les comptes en ligne aillent bien, soient bien à la personne qui est titulaire, permettre la sécurité des contrats, permettre la facilité de constitution des sociétés, et puis en même temps, parce que la régulation c'est aussi ça, mettre en place des moyens pour assurer la sécurité générale de l'Internet. Et donc, il y a déjà un grand nombre de pays africains qui ont créé des agences nationales de sécurité des systèmes d'information, qui mettent en place ce qu'on appelle des CERT, donc des centres de réaction aux incidents, etc., qui finalement essayent de nourrir la sécurité générale. Voilà, une action sur les infrastructures et puis une action sur les sécurités juridiques et de sécurité. Et puis on laisse les initiatives, on encourage les initiatives et on fait confiance à ces citoyens et c'est comme ça qu'ils vont sortir.
Alors, vous avez mentionné les systèmes de paiement, la sécurisation des systèmes de paiement. On a oublié d'évoquer un changement majeur qui a ouvert pas mal d'opportunités pour les acteurs africains dans l'Internet. par rapport à leur système de régulation de change notamment. Je veux parler du Bitcoin. Finalement, il y a pas mal de possibilités à travers cette monnaie numérique de pouvoir apporter du capital pour ces initiatives. Anybody wants to take and anybody has an opinion on basically Bitcoin and alternative financing mechanism with respect to the continent's regulation? Obviously, with the Bitcoin, you've seen that you can handle, you can attract funds, you can support your initiatives. And obviously, you're not prone to the control mechanism that most countries in developing economies have. Jean-Paul, would you like to take a look?
Okay, I think Bitcoin is a two-edged sword. It has significant opportunities, but then we also need to be careful about the downside. And I think it's quite interesting. It's coincidental that you asked this, because I made a post on LinkedIn yesterday, and I said, in the last decade, I've seen African entrepreneurs create innovative solutions in financial services, affordable housing, clean energy. But there remains a big problem that's the elephant in the room, and that is corruption. If our African entrepreneurs have been able to find innovative ways to create value, how do you think we can crack the corruption problem? And then I left it open to my audience. And repeatedly, Bitcoin continued to come up. And that goes to tell you that there's a lot of possibility here. But then we also need to be conscious of the part where we still have issues with money laundering. We have issues with organized crime. People are into financial crimes, significant and large-scale fraud. That would mean that it would be difficult to that would also enhance the activities of these kinds of people. So I think the conversation around Bitcoin might not really be regulation, because if we look at the trend of regulation on the continent, we notice that African regulators are always playing catch up. Most times the technology has like a 3, 4, 5-year lead. Even up till now, social media, we're still in the middle of the conversation. Should we regulate social media or not? We're having issues with fake news, with incitement of violence, and all those things. And right now, our regulators still don't have any clue how to regulate social media. The same thing is going on in sectors like renewable energy. There is no serious regulation. Financial services, fintech, the same thing. So if we wait for regulators to more or less de-risk the Bitcoin experience, that may be a problem, because we know they are slow. So I think the solutions to Bitcoin should be inherent in the technology itself, which I know there are very strong capabilities within Bitcoin. But in an African perspective, we need to be careful the way we deploy it. But I think it has significant benefits for the continent.
Thank you, Irène. I'd like to have your take on the governance of digital technologies in our continent. What can essentially governments do to try either to regulate, to stimulate? What are the possibilities in that regard?
Well, I think governance on the continent in terms of digitalization is quite low. It's not well coordinated. I think government should kind of work in collaboration with the ecosystem, okay? Whether it's the financial fintech ecosystem or agri-tech, but work with the ecosystem and support what they are doing, and then regulate accordingly. It shouldn't be in isolation. Both parties need to come together. Government needs to support what the ecosystem is doing, and then regulate it accordingly.
So you see a development, a bottom-up development based on digital ecosystems.
Absolutely.
Do we have any examples of successful ecosystems on the continent, for example?
To my mind now, I can't remember, but I know that in some parts of the continent that has already started. Some countries that has already started happening. I don't want to make any mistake, about the country that I know where it has started happening, to partner with the ecosystem to come up with the right policies to regulate the financial sector and all these new technologies.
Okay, to conclude, I'm gonna, unless somebody would like to add something.
Sorry, if I may, just picking up on Irene and John Paul's point. We in the UK, America, and others are still struggling to cope with regulation or not of social media in particular as well. I mean, we've largely, again, I'm sure Scott will have views on this, we've largely left it up to them. And what seems to have happened is they're now finally sort of taking some sort of action. But for many audiences, it's too little too late. So it may well be that governments step in, but then again, as both Irene and John Paul indicated there, is that just a one country solution, or is that a wider solution? I mean, certainly, I remember reading sort of Mark Zuckerberg talking about sort of taxation of tech companies, particularly his tech company, and suggesting this should be done at some sort of global level. Now, on the one hand, you could say, well, that's great. He's recognizing that something needs to be done, and that's quite refreshing. On the other hand, from a practical political position, as we'll all realise, that it's difficult enough getting ideas and passing legislation and regulations in one country. As soon as you start sort of ratcheting that up amongst a whole range of different countries to come to an agreement, frankly, it puts it in the extremely difficult, if not impossible, box. So on the one hand, you could say he's being very enlightened. On the other hand, actually, what he's really saying is, if we do that, then it's never going to happen. So I think that regulation idea still has plenty of space to play out, across Western countries as well as in African countries.
So in conclusion, I would like to ask every one of you to, in 1 minute, to summarize what you think will be the lasting trend, the determining factor that COVID-19 would have brought to the digital era. Who would like to start in 1 minute?
So I think COVID-19 will be remembered, despite the casualties, financial and human, as the year that unlocked and unleashed the digital revolution in Africa. This year, I've seen most people who didn't even know what Zoom was. Somebody called me and said, do you know what Zoom is? I said, I've been using it for 4 years. I said, I've never heard of it. Now, I can't imagine any other situation or scenario where people who are really not interested in tech will get so absorbed or involved in technology. So in that direction, I see it as a good thing. I also think the COVID era will be remembered as the year where, while other businesses suffered, tech businesses were actually on the rise. I think many people will not forget that in a hurry. So as we go into the future, I think COVID helped people build some habits that will be difficult to shake off. So we now know that you can work remotely. You don't have to be in the office. We now know that your supplier can come to you rather than you go to the supplier. We now know that children can learn from home. We now know that education is possible virtually. I would struggle to find another scenario where people would more or less take up technology at such a pace and such a rate. So yes, I do not like the year for the casualties, but looking forward, I think it's essentially a crisis that the technology trend capitalized on. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott, would you like?
To pick up on what John Paul has said, can I go on?
Please go ahead, Irène.
So to pick up on what John Paul, I think the pandemic would be a pandemic to remember. It has been also with all the devastation, but it has also created opportunities. So it's a time when new opportunities have been born. It has pushed people to come out of their comfort zones and see that they can do things differently. They can reinvent their businesses. So a lot of people have already grabbed those opportunities. It's also a period that we as women, we have realized that we can't just lie back anymore. So economies are also realizing the importance of including women in the economy, because it benefits the economy. It's not just for gender equality or equity or whatever, but for economic reasons for the countries. So it's the opportunities that have been created and that can still be created moving forward because of the impact of the pandemic.
Okay, Scott, would you like to?
Sure. I agree with my other colleagues on this, but I also think that it has helped us find new communities and be able to hyper-local organize. And so whether that means making listservs or community bulletin boards more relevant to find different resources, I think that even in the US, we've seen people become a little bit more scrappier, a little bit more innovative in their solutions. And this trend towards not waiting for local or national government is a worldwide trend to getting folks to help themselves and do a better job of policing. And so I think that you're watching the internet grow up from all this sort of nonsense and back and forth and loud shouting and hate. You're also seeing a lot of young people moving beyond that and trying to figure out new ways to collaborate. And I think that that's a worldwide phenomenon that we're not going to forget anytime soon. The fact that we're able to be on this call and have 5-6 countries on this call and be able to collaborate and work together is something that I think probably several of us on the call were leery of. How would Amadeus and MEDays exist? And turns out that we can do just fine having these conversations online.
So a message of resilience. Olivier.
Oui, alors tout d'abord un mot de merci à MEDays, comme disait Scott, pour nous permettre de nous réunir. Je vois que ça a été une formidable accélération de la transformation digitale. Ce n'est pas une révolution, parce que la révolution digitale et numérique, elle dure finalement depuis 3 décennies, mais c'est une vague forte qui s'est accélérée. Là, on a une nouvelle étape avec une transformation digitale qui s'est massifiée, qui s'est propagée à des acteurs qui ne la connaissaient pas et partout à travers le monde. Donc oui, c'est une opportunité. Cela étant, ça a aussi été une opportunité pour les brigands, les malfaisants, les méchants, parce qu'on a eu une augmentation du risque associé avec cette transformation digitale et donc une explosion des cyberagressions. Et puis c'est peut-être mon rôle un peu d'être le gardien du temple. Vive l'opportunité, vive la liberté, vive l'imagination, vive l'innovation, mais il ne faut pas oublier la sécurité et la sûreté. Et ce sont des choses qui doivent aussi accompagner nos efforts pour accompagner cette transformation digitale à l'œuvre. Merci.
Merci, Stuart. You have the last word.
Thank you. Some more pressure. I mean, I would point to, I think, 3 main things that this period will sort of deliver us with and from. One is that point about centralized governments being under increased pressure from groups, youth, women rightly demanding a role, and other community groups as well. So that would be one trend. I think another trend would be businesses coming under pressure to play a more active role in their communities as well. I mean, that's partly financial, it's partly expectation and partly reputational, so a number of pressures on there. And I think the third trend would be, because of the economic pressures that we will all face in that post-COVID environment, certainly for Africa, more opportunities to engage globally, particularly in Britain because of Brexit as well. So a period of great opportunity as well as great challenge.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your input into this challenging topic. And because of the state of the pandemic, we proved once more in terms of resilience that we managed to meet and do business, carry on business the way everybody has more or less achieved during these days. This is a reason for which I'd like to thank you very much for your involvement. I'd like to thank you, Scott, for waking up also very early to participate basically very quickly into this debate. And we all wish that you stay safe in the coming weeks and we look forward to meet again in the next edition of MEDays, hopefully in Tangier next year. Thank you very much.